especially appreciate Mr. Riley talking about small town papers, because if large publishers are having this problem, you can about imagine how adversely affected smaller publishers that do business in North Dakota are by this issue. And my first grown-up job was coaching our summer American Legion baseball team. And I learned two things very early in life when dealing with the press and dealing with the kids of parents. One, you never get in trouble for what you don't say. And two, you should always criticize in private and praise in public. So I've carried those with me for a long time, and so I appreciate that. But just earlier, we had heard, so Mr. Chavern and Mr. Pitofsky and Mr. Kimmelman talked about antitrust. And so we assume that we know that exists competition problem in the market. But we already have long-standing remedy, and that's antitrust enforcement if necessary. And I think there might be a little disagreement about whether that is actually sufficient. So supporters of this bill will argue that we need an exemption from antitrust laws, which allows them to come together to negotiate terms. Why should we enact the Journalist Competition Act as opposed to just enforcing antitrust law? And I'll just start with Mr. Schruers.
Well, thank you very much. The current antitrust laws protect Google and Facebook from us, interestingly, which is both wrong and ironic from our perspective. What we're suggesting is really what we view as the lightest touch option on the table in terms of giving us the power just to stand up for ourselves. And also, I have to note there's a real urgency in the industry currently. This is an industry that really can't wait years and years for antitrust solutions. We're at a crisis point now. And what we're asking for is relatively simple, relatively straightforward. We're not asking the government to regulate anyone or tax anyone. We're just really asking to be left alone to defend ourselves.
Thank you. Mr. Kimmelman.
So I do think antitrust can help. I think we've had a lapse in antitrust. Ms. Hubbard referred to it. I don't know about the specific cases. It's always easier in hindsight to say something was anti-competitive. Hard to tell at the time, but there's no doubt that we've had under-enforcement and we need stronger enforcement. I do not believe it solves this problem. It certainly doesn't solve an immediate crisis, but I do worry that you should look very carefully at whether the kind of negotiation that Mr. Collins was talking about and the way it would happen is what would actually happen in the marketplace. I am not at all sure that's how it would work. I'm not at all sure who is a news content creator. You have wonderful news creators here in front of you today. There are tabloids. There are a lot of purveyors of there are a lot of bad people out there too. So I just think this is very complicated. You ought to take a very careful look at what would actually create a better marketplace dynamic. I actually believe there are better ways to do this, but it requires a different approach.
And Mr. Pitofsky?
Yes, I would say that antitrust has been interpreted relatively narrowly for the last 40 years, and these markets are presenting new challenges that it's going to take time, and this committee's investigation is helping move in that direction of understanding how these new markets work. So, for example, when some of these mergers were approved, some of the people objecting raised privacy concerns, but the regulators felt that privacy was not an area that antitrust could cover. I think as we've had experience with these platforms, we understand that privacy is an aspect of product quality. All of the users of these tools have expectations that those tools carry privacy that's in their interest. And antitrust just hasn't really stretched its muscles in a long time to understand those kinds of quality issues. And it's going to take a while. The facts are complicated, the law is complicated. Judicial precedents need re-examination, and so the bill is a good short-term remedy while the larger issues are tackled.
Ms. Hubbard, do you want to talk?
I agree with Mr. Pitofsky. I caution I worry about what Mr. Kimmelman is saying, that sometimes when we say things are too complicated, it's a way of not doing anything, and that's what we've been saying in this space for a long time. Where we've seen regulators around the world and enforcers around the world address this problem, and we've just been sitting back worrying it's too complicated. And I think it's important to take action quickly and not keep kind of viewing complication as a reason to do nothing.
And I agree with that. I don't think too complicated is ever an answer, but I would also say, and this is not an apples to apples comparison, but we're gonna get to watch this play out a little bit because the EU just adopted really strict internet rules, and one of the goals was to increase and remove barriers to entry. But by holding the platforms themselves liable for copyright violations, they may have, the cure may actually be worse for them than the disease, and time will tell, but automatic filter programs and scrubber programs that such as YouTube uses, because you mentioned YouTube earlier, are incredibly expensive to run. And so, and plus, I mean, at least in the EU, and it's not quite the same. And I'm sorry for going over that.
that's
I didn't
okay.
do an opening statement.
No, that's why I didn't gavel you down yet.
But they pass the rules, each member country is going to have to promulgate their own laws in association with those rules, which can cause all kinds of problems in that companies are going to have to operate in a patchwork of different laws, or just follow the most strict laws of any of those countries, or probably the worst case scenario is not do business in some of those countries. So when you come from a small state and knowing that states like California and New York will dictate a marketplace, you always get concerned about that. So I agree with you, but we are going to get to watch it.
Can I respond really quickly that we do have a tool that we've had for a very long time, which is the antitrust laws. So before you're looking at kind of different solutions that Europe is pursuing, we'd use the antitrust laws against Microsoft. It led to innovation. Many people say if it weren't for our antitrust enforcement against Microsoft, Google would never actually have been able to come onto the scene. So it's not actually a novel problem or novel tools. So we have these tools.
No, and I agree, which is why I asked the antitrust question to start the questioning process. Sorry about that.
No.